Is our many-time presenter, John Guttman, who you all know. John tells me that basically he is, as usual, all over the place now. He's writing for the Canadians, the Navy, among other things. So, as usual, he's keeping busy, and today he's going to talk about aces. John?
Well, talking about aces, eh? Well, gee, that's a new subject for me, isn't it? But to be a little more specific, we're dealing this time with a genre of ace, and what has been maybe fairly or unfairly been regarded as a period of transition in the whole cult of the ace and the whole mentality behind them. Specifically September 1917, which, to be perfectly honest, was chosen because we're in the midst of a centennial and we're not that far from that centennial here. The reason September 1917 seems like such a bellwether is that it marked the death of two significant legends in their own time, and at the same time seemed to be a sea change in how fighter pilots were regarded, in fact, as how the entire air war was regarded. That wouldn't exactly be fair either, because it was not really even within the dramatic period of a month that this was happening. It was actually gradually happening ever since the Battle of Verdun. One may even argue that it goes back to the battles of the Marne and Tannenberg, when, for reasons we've already discussed, the airplane began to be taken seriously. And it was being taken more seriously by the month from there. And yet, there are two names in particular that stand out in September 1917, just for the sheer drama of it, and that was the man who had become France's #1 hero of the air by then, Georges Guynemer, and an equivalent hero on the German side, perhaps more in the opinion of his enemies than his comrades, Werner Voss. Another cause of the extra drama for September 1917 was the introduction in combat of an iconic airplane. And here again, that's not necessarily the cause around the plane alone, because there were other aircraft that were already starting to make appearances about the same time it did. I refer, of course, to the Fokker F.I, the pre-production precursor of the DR-1 triplane. But by that time, the British had introduced twin machine guns to their repertoire back with the Sopwith Camel, and the French in August were, in fact, even in June of 1917, had first unveiled the Spad 13. Both sides were trying to come up with better aircraft before September came along, but it was the events that marked the month. Among those at the top of his game by then, just recently out of hospital, was Rittmeister Manfred von Richthofen, back at the helm of Jagdgeschwader 1, his flying circus. He had been interested in this new triplane, and when it arrived, he was quite pleased to take command of it. And he started the month off in fine style by attacking an RE-8 over at Zonnebeke and shooting down Lieutenant J.B.C. Madge, who was wounded and taken prisoner, and killing his observer, Second Lieutenant Walter Kember. one of the reasons he got as close to the plane as he did before he fired was because, having never seen a German triplane before, they had mistaken it for a Sopwith triplane, the fighter that had inspired the German Inflieg, overreacting not for the first time to order everyone to come up with a triplane. Ironically, the one that they adopted was built by someone who wasn't all that keen on building a triplane, Anthony Fokker. But he was also primarily a businessman, and if that's what the Germans wanted, he would take his brand new cantilever wooden box spar wing and apply it to a triplane. So the Baron got it, and further went down in legend for having scored its first victory. Here's a picture of Fokker in the cockpit with Richthofen, second from right, looking on. And Fokker with, next to Konstantin Kreft, the technical officer, Richthofen on the right, and with the Pour le Mérite on him, Kurt Wolff, another legendary member of the Baron's Gentlemen from Bloody April, who at that point had 33 victories to his credit and would soon be promoted to Oberleutnant and given command of Jagdstaffel 11. And with it, while Richthofen was on leave, care of that F1 102, Wolff had not had much success since he had been shot down and injured in July 1917. He was very keen to get back in the game. And so on September 15th, he was leading the Albatros D.V of Jasta 11 when they got into a fight with No.56 Squadron, Royal Naval Air Service. And for anyone who is wondering how the DR-1 would do against a camel, well, that was one answer. Wolff was in the midst of the fight, was latched onto on the tail by Flight Lieutenant Norman McMillan of Naval 10, and shot down and killed. Of the two F-1s at the front, by the middle of September, it was down to one. But I'm getting slightly ahead of myself here because there had been plenty going on in between. On September 3rd, Richthofen got into a dogfight with a pup of No.56 Squadron, flown by Second Lieutenant Algernon F. Bird, and brought it down intact, which pleased Fokker, who happened to be there to take a picture of the scene, and pleased Bird simply because he had survived a run-in with the Baron. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is that on that same day, Werner Voss of Jasta 10, who is Richthofen's friendly rival, which was part of his legend, shot down a Sopwith camel. So let's not be too hasty about how triplane and camel would do. In fact, Voss was going on a shooting spree of his own in the course of the month. While Richthofen only got 2 in that period, Voss would total 10. Others would also be going down in the course of that. On the same day, September 3rd, Hauptmann Otto Hartmann, commander of Jasta 28, 7 victories, would be killed in a run-in with Bristol fighters of No.48 Squadron, Lieutenants Robert E. Dodds and T.C.S. Tuffield being most likely responsible for bringing him down. The next day, Oberleutnant Wilhelm Reinhard of Jasta 11 was wounded over Hutulst, and Oberleutnant Erich Hahn, 6 victories, acting commander of Jasta 19, was killed in action by Sous-Lieutenant Georges Matton of N.38. Hahn had already 6 victories to his credit, including French ace René Dumais, who he shot down and killed on April 26, 1917. So Matton had gotten revenge, whether he knew it or not. The French were also losing noteworthy aces. On September 10th, Capitaine Georges Matton, commander of N.48, victor over 9 German aircraft, was killed in action by Lieutenant Josef Jacobs of Jasta 7. And then on September 11th, a day of disaster if you are French at that time, Capitaine Georges Guynemer, who had been up with Lieutenant Boson-Verraz, had failed to return. Benjamin Boson-Verraz came back, and the first words out of his mouth is, "Has he returned yet?" Guynemer had not. With 53 victories, France's most famous hero had disappeared. Guynemer had a number of claims to fame. Among the pioneer fighter pilots of France, he'd also, among others, had put the seal of approval on the new SPAD 7, shown here as the first one that he received, the first of many. He would also get the first one with the new higher compression 180 horsepower engine, and you can still see that at the Musée de l'Air et l'Espace. But in August 1917, he had received one of the earliest SPAD 13s with twin machine guns. It had been built, in fact, to satisfy one of his suggestions for up-powering and up-arming the SPAD. It was also his idea that they try producing one with a cannon, and he had used one to shoot down 4 German aircraft before getting the 13. It was a good thing that Guynemer had started out as a mechanic and still kept his hand in, because he soon discovered that the geared 200 horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine of the SPAD 13 was constantly breaking down. He often tried keeping it flying himself. But on September 11th, there's the SPAD 13 during a takeoff from Les Meurs in Belgium. And there's Boson-Verraz on the left with Louis Rizacher of Spa 3 on the right. All of them would end up aces. Boson-Verraz would later command Spa 94 and bring his total to 11. And Rizacher would score 5 with Spa 3 and 159 as its executive officer. The 2 of them were supposed to go up with Guynemer that day, but Rizacher's plane malfunctioned, so it was just Boson-Verraz who went up with him. Word of his death did not come out for at least a month, when the Germans announced that they had found his body, but came under artillery fire before they could retrieve it for a decent burial, so he disappeared like an infantryman on the Western Front. As for, it was about that time also that the Germans announced that Lieutenant Kurt Waldhausen of Jasta 3 was responsible for shooting him down. We'll see just about how plausible that turns out. As a matter of fact, it does turn out that Waldhausen's victim didn't fall anywhere near where or when Guynemer did. A more plausible theory that's recently come up for Guynemer's demise would be that he was attacking a Rumpler C-4 from Fliegerabteilung Artillerie 224W, a Württemberg unit, crewed by Flieger Georg Seibert and Lieutenant der Reserve Max Psar, who may have shot him down as he was diving on them. And they never were able to put in for the kill because later that same day they were shot down and killed near Oudkapelle, 17 kilometers north of Peulkapelle, where Guynemer died, by Lieutenant Maurice Medats of the Belgian 1st Escadrille de Chasse. But for a long time the French had the legend that Guynemer had simply flown so high he could never come down, which brings us back to our legends. In the midst of a French disaster on September 11th, it might be added that another camel fell to Voss that day, bringing Lieutenant Oliver L. McMaking of No.55 Squadron, a 6 victory ace with that unit, to his doom east of Saint-Julien. And almost ignored by history was the death of Captain Louis Flaming Jenkin, military cross holder and 22 victory ace of No.1 Squadron RFC, when his Nieuport was shot down northeast of Bixschota by Oberleutnant Otto Schmidt of Jasta 29. Most of you probably have never even heard of Jenkin, which brings up another point that has been made in the past. While the Germans and the French were celebrating their glittering aces, the British seldom were. Most of the time they were just doing their bit and trying not to let the side down. And this was a classic case where the Germans and French could create legends, but the British were already well past that. It's the team that counts. Among those team members was, on the right, Robert Leslie Chidlaw Roberts, a Welsh fighter pilot who would be rather active with No.60 Squadron in SE-5s and SE-5As, who will be turning up later. While we're going chronologically, for September 14th, 1917, we're not talking aces here, but a rather unusual pilot just the same. On the 14th, a camel of No.70 Squadron was brought down west of Roulers by Vizefeldwebel Gustav Schneiderwind of Jasta 17 and taken prisoner. I'm going to pass around a photo I recently found of this camel, which bears the letter N, otherwise bears classic markings for No.70 Squadron. Its pilot was Second Lieutenant Errol Suva Chandra Sen, one of the first Indian pilots to be accepted by the Royal Flying Corps. Good catch, huh? But also on the 14th, another German ace, Lieutenant Gisbert Wilhelm Gross of Jasta 11, with 6 victories, was wounded in action. He wouldn't return to combat until 1918, when he would score his 7th. And then, of course, there was the death of Wolff. The carnage continued. September 20th, Lieutenant Erich Löwenhardt of Jasta 10 was wounded in action. That rather went unremarked, although already an ace, he had yet to really come into his own as eventually Germany's No.3 ace. September 22nd, Vizefeldwebel Fritz Kosmahl of Jasta 26 was wounded south of Peulkapelle by Chidlaw Roberts, our friend from the earlier photo, in conjunction with Captain Harold Hammersley, an Australian of No.60 Squadron. Here again, when it comes to the British, they weren't ashamed to credit teamwork where teamwork was due. Kosmahl, by the way, was one of the rare two-seater aces on the German side. He had scored 5 victories with various LVGs, Rolands, and so on, before going to Jasta 26 and becoming a single-seat pilot and scoring 4 more victories. He died of his wounds 4 days later. At that point, the stage is set for the other greatest drama of the lot here. The other F1 being flown by Werner Voss. As mentioned earlier, with Richthofen on leave, Voss was taking the occasion to try and catch up with him. Richthofen's score at that point was 61. By the morning of September 23rd, Voss had raised his to 48 and was really keen to see if he could at least make it an even 50, even though he was supposed to go on leave with his 2 brothers. As Lieutenant Alois Heldmann put it, in spite of his mastery, Voss was burning out. He was showing, as he put it, he was as on edge as a cat, and there can only be one outcome. But Voss just had to go up for one more try in his F1, and among the people he would run into would be Hammersley and Chidlaw Roberts. He had already shot down a de Havilland DH-4 that morning. No.56 Squadron was on patrol when Hammersley found himself under attack by a triplane. And Chidlaw Roberts tried to go to his aid, but as he told me, he was hit early on in a strut, and at that point it was all he could do to nurse his plane back in. Hammersley's plane was also shot up, but he managed to get down. Meanwhile, looking on from on high was No.56 Squadron's B flight under James Byford McCutton, who thought that that SE under attack looked terribly unhappy, so he led his men down to fight it, and ended up getting the fight of his life, as Voss showed him what the F1 was capable of. What happened next in the course of the fight is pretty well chronicled. As I mentioned earlier, Chidlaw Roberts, while trying to help Hammersley, fired only a few rounds before the triplane whipped around him and shot up his rudder bar. Chidlaw Roberts said, "I retired from the fray and that's all I saw of it." Captain Keith Caldwell of No.60 Squadron noticed that a flight of 56 Squadron's SEs, and a very good one too, had taken Voss off its tail and were busy with him in their midst. It was then really 56's affair, and 6-1 was pretty good odds, we felt. We were more or less spectators. In my opinion, there was little room to join in. As a matter of fact, C Flight had also noticed things, led by Captain Jeffrey Hilton Bowman. It had already fought several fights of its own when it noticed McCutton's B Flight having trouble with this one German, and an Albatros D.V that had entered the fray, so it joined in. Meanwhile, Voss got on Second Lieutenant Verschoyle P. Cronin's tail, and although that Canadian managed to dive away, when he landed his SE-5A, the plane was so badly damaged that the wings were drooping. He spent the night uncontrollably perspiring and unable to sleep. Lieutenant Keith Muspratt was also driven out of the fight with a bullet in his radiator. Voss, though, still had to deal with McCutton, Rhys Davids, Bowman, Reginald T.C. Hoyge, Richard A. Maybury, some of the top guns of No.56 Squadron. At one point, McCutton saw the triplane in the apex of a cone of tracer bullets from at least 5 machines simultaneously. Yet, as Mayberry expressed it, he seemed invulnerable. By that time, an Albatros had entered the scrap, and that was and why is it doing this? Okay. Most likely, the Albatros in question was being flown by Karl Menkhoff of Jasta III. But Rhys Davids shot up his Albatros D.V and drove him out of the fight. He would go on to get 39 victories, and his luck would run out later when he was brought down by an American Spad 13, much to his disgust. With all the fighting going on, both McCudden and Bowman testified that one of the damnedest things they saw was the way, in the midst of things, the German and the triplane would kick his rudder and turn the plane without even banking and then kick it back before there could be any ill effect. As Bowman put it, I myself had only one crack at it, and he was about to pass broadside on my bows and slightly lower. I put my nose down to fire him a burst and opened fire, perhaps too soon. To my amazement, he kicked on full rudder without bank, pulled up his nose slightly, gave me a burst while he was skidding sideways, and then kicked on opposite rudder before the results of this amazing stunt appeared to have any effect on the controllability of his machine. Rhys Davids was then on his tail. Here's a painting of Rhys Davids from the time. He was another of 56 Squadron's best, but on this occasion, at one point the two almost collided. Rhys Davids then reported, I saw him next with his engine apparently off, gliding west. I dived again and got one shot out of my Vickers. However, I reloaded and kept in the dive. I got in another good burst, and the triplane did a slight right-hand turn, still going down. I had now overshot him. This was at 1,000 feet. Zoomed and never saw him again. At that juncture, Rhys Davids ran into the red-nosed Albatros and attacked that as well, forcing it to crash land, which brings us back to Menkhoff, who survived. Voss, of course, was less fortunate. The wreckage was allocated the captured number G72 for British intelligence, but there wasn't enough left of it to supply much information on the Fokker F.I. Nevertheless, as word about Voss's last combat spread, it pretty much put the seal of approval on full production of the Fokker triplane. Other events would soon follow, though. Lieutenant Julius Schmidt of Jasta III would be wounded by a camel of No. 70 Squadron on the 24th, and Vizefeldwebel Fritz Kosmahl of Jasta V was also wounded. On September 25th, Lieutenant Volder Goetsch of Jasta VIII was wounded in a fight with a squadron he'd often had run-ins with, No. 20 Squadron. Only this time, instead of FEs, they were flying Bristols. On the 27th, Oberleutnant Kurt Waldhausen of Jasta 37 ended a rather meteorically short career with Jasta 37, during which, eager to add to the new Jagdstaffel's score, which at the time he joined was only 2 planes, but then they just gotten a new commander, Lieutenant Ernst Udet, who would soon be adding to it, and who would also give Waldhausen a few tips. Well, in a matter of a month, Waldhausen scored 6 victories. In fact, on the 27th, he downed a balloon, an RE-8, and another balloon. But then his luck ran out when he was shot down and taken prisoner by Lieutenant J.H. Tudhope, a No. 40 Squadron, and Flight Commander Charles D. Booker of Naval 8. Here we got even the Navy and the RFC cooperating. Says something about the British in itself, doesn't it? Then on September 28th, a minor German ace of considerable fame also died. Kurt Waldhausen, the man who allegedly killed Guynemer, was shot down and killed on the 28th. René Fonck, who had claimed to have sworn to avenge Guynemer, grandly announced that he had in fact avenged him by shooting down Waldhausen. But as was the case with Waldhausen's claim, the place and time just doesn't match Fonck's claim. More likely, he was brought down by Reggie Hodge of No.56 Squadron. Sorry, French chaps, but the British have a certain say in these things. And why have I lost everything at this point? Just when I was about to wrap up?
Click on your icon. Lower right. Lower right, John.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it there.
It's got a broken arrow.
You're probably holding the mouse upside down.
You've got the mouse upside down. Turn the mouse around. Turn the mouse around.
Cord comes out the top.
Shouldn't it be responding?
The cord should be
This
coming.
one?
Yep.
Yeah. Double click. Use your arrows. Just use the arrows on the keyboard.
Well, it looks like I'm getting there anyway.
All right.
All right.
So some of us need to be told.
So all in all, this had been quite a month of legends rising and falling, but with the loss of Guynemer and Voss especially, these lone heroes, this marked a transition into a period when, at a time that air battles were growing, it wasn't enough to be an ace in itself. The British had more of a handle on what was to come. Overall air superiority was becoming important, and not only for the idea of leaving the sky open for observation, aviation's original purpose. In August 1917, at the same time the Fokker F.I made its appearance and the Pfalz D.3 made its disappointing first appearance on the Western Front, and Escadrille Spa 3 got its first SPAD 13, another plane was making its debut. The Halberstadt CL.II, a smaller, compactor version of the two-seater, handier for and more maneuverable for the kind of job it was to take, which was close support over the front. At that same time, the German Schutzstaffeln, with which these were meant to act as two-seat fighters protecting the reconnaissance planes, began to make their transition into Schlachtstaffeln, or battle flights. And it was during September 1917 that the full import of this made itself clear, as the British were continuing their Passchendaele offensive. On September 3rd, the Germans were forced to evacuate Peronne, while British reinforcements were reported massing along the Somme at Bray and Saint-Christ. When the British began crossing the bridges there, 24 Halberstadt CL.IIs swooped in, shooting and hurling down grenades from as low as 100 feet. As the Germans hoped, panic ensued, with Tommies throwing themselves off the bridge and off the parapets to escape the punishment. further back, artillery troops and their horses were attacked by the Halberstadts. Only 2 Sopwith scouts intervened, and in a demonstration of the agility and aggressive teamwork that the CL.II shared with the Bristol fighter, the Germans shot one of them down. All told, the Germans estimated that their 25 Halberstadts had left the better part of a division in disarray. The CL.IIs now had their seal of approval too, and sometimes with some thin armor under the pilot and observer, who you'll notice are very close together so that they can mutually cooperate. They would become more and more of an item over the Western Front. So too would another similar development that came out at about the same time, the Hanover CL.III, and also in that month, a close support aircraft, the Junkers J-1, which was distinguished from the other two by not being all that maneuverable. In fact, the Germans referred to it as the Möbelwagen, or furniture van. But it had another trick up its sleeve. It had an all-metal framework, all-metal cantilever wings, and armor from the engine to the pilot and observer. The crews sometimes complained about how overweight and underpowered it was, but their other greatest complaint was there weren't enough of them. As with the Halberstadts, they were loaded with explosives, grenades, or even canned food to throw down to the troops if they needed it. Close support was coming into its own in that month, and within the next 2 months the British would be trying to work out aircraft for the same purpose, including the poor hapless Sopwith Camels, whose maneuverability was put into play for ground strafing, even though the pilots themselves thought it was a dirty job. Also joining in was the de Havilland DH-5, which had proven a dud as a fighter, but its good forward visibility with its back-staggered wing made it useful for ground attack at least. So this was taking over at the front, emphasizing once again that the airplane was becoming more and more of an asset than merely a reconnaissance machine. So in conclusion, whether or not it's fair to pick out this month, and there would be a bloodier month to come in October. As a matter of fact, on October 27th, Rhys Davids would go down with 25 victories to his credit, the victim of Karl Galwitz of Jasta Belki. There wasn't exactly going to be any rest in the next few months either, till the Passchendaele campaign finally sputtered itself out. But at this time, there was as much activity in the air as there was on the ground, and it would only get bigger in the months to come. The airplane was truly becoming as much a part of the Western Front as the trench warfare below it. Any questions?